Welcome to Living the Reclaimed Life podcast. I'm Denisha, and we're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. So grab a cup of coffee as we chat with today's guest. We have such a special treat for you here today. One of my dear friends is joining us, Kristin Petersavage. And guys, her story, we are about to be blessed. We are going to hear how she has defied all odds. She was born with a birth defect and has identified a unique perspective given to her from birth. And I think it's going to change your life. It really had a huge impact on me and my perspective. So I'm excited for you to meet her. Introducing Kristin, she has been married for 28 years. She has 5 children. 2 are adopted, and she has been in ministry, you guys, for 25 years. And she has some amazing, rich insight. I have had the privilege of being in ministry with Kristin for the past 10 years, a little over 10 years now.
Yes.
And we have done real life together on top of ministry, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
No doubt. Well, I'm so excited for you to share with our listeners your story. How about we start at your birth? Tell us a little bit about what you experienced at birth.
Okay. Welcome to everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Denisha, for this opportunity. I was born with something that is called congenital hip dysplasia. And what that means is I had a ball, but I did not have a socket for my leg to be attached. And back in the day, in 1970, the doctors believed that they would then hospitalize a baby, an infant, for extended periods of time with their legs hanging in traction. And so I stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks at a time where they would hang my legs straight to the ceiling, and then they would open my legs a little, I think 5 degrees a day. They just really wanted to send the blood flow to the hip socket, really thinking that that was going to cause the bone to grow on its own. So that, when you talk about an interesting perspective, it really gave me the perspective, obviously, as an infant laying on my back and looking up. And not only that, at the age of 2, almost until at the age of 4.5, I was in frog casts where they actually cast your legs with your hips completely open to 180 degrees. And my dad had to build little wooden benches for me to sit on, because how can you sit a toddler in a seat? And so again, just kind of that perspective of always needing someone to help me, always looking up. Then at the age of 4.5, I did finally had surgery. I had a hip surgery, and they actually used my pelvic bone to actually build the hip socket that was missing. And
oh, wow. So it didn't grow in on its own.
It didn't grow in, which they thought. I was in recovery in a full body cast for about a month. You know, the mechanic creepers? Have you ever had your car repaired?
Oh, goodness.
And they slide under the car on them?
Yes.
That's what I was laid on. And my parents pulled the string and would take me where I needed to go based on lying on that mechanics creeper. So again, just having that perspective of looking up and really needing to have someone help me, because at that point I couldn't help myself. So I learned how to study the ceilings. I really became enthralled with the sky and the sun and just all the things that you see. And I distinctively remember when I was in recovery, kind of wondering to myself, what's beyond that sky? Like, what is up there? You know, and I did grow up going to church, and heaven was a place that, to me, that was beyond the sky. And so I think even from an early age, I had that God-sized perspective.
Wow. You know, as a parent, I can only imagine what it would be like to have a 4-year-old in a full body cast, and having to lay there and having to take you everywhere, still making sure you get out, experience things that you should at that age. I can't imagine that had to be not only a challenge for you, but also for your parents too. I love that you remember looking up.
Yep. I sure do.
Wow.
Yeah. Looking up just really kind of stuck with me. Fast forwarding a little bit to the age of 7. So I do remember, as I said, kind of having that perspective of heaven and kind of being curious about who God was. And I very specifically remember at the age of 7 in a Sunday school class, they showed, I think it was a Wycliffe video on missionaries. There was just such a drawing to that. I felt at that time called to help other people. I really had a passion for that. At the end of the film, they kind of asked us if we wanted to know God and have a relationship with God. And so I do remember that at the age of 7. And really, it kind of changed my perspective. Not only was heaven something that I looked up to, but it was also just that relationship with God and looking up and having that desire in my heart to do what he wanted me to do and to be who he wanted me to be. And I just love that because with our kids and as we've raised them, just that awe and wonder that kids have at the ages basically from birth on, especially at 7, just as they look around in awe and wonder.
That's so neat. For as long as I've known you, I know that you've always had a passion for hurting people. Is that when it came in? Did it come in at 7?
Yeah, wow. I really think it did. I wasn't ever really best friends with a lot of people. What I did more was I noticed the people that were on the outskirts, the people that had a disability or the people that were shy or didn't really know how to engage with other people. And I remember that growing up, that I just had an affinity for that. And I was drawn to those people and always wanting to make sure that they were included.
Wow. I love that. I love that. You defied all the odds, right?
Did.
By being that young and going through that type of not only surgery, but that type of recovery and all the things that led up to that.
They did tell my parents that they really didn't know if I would walk normally again.
Wow.
And so I think my parents, after the cast was taken off, I learned how to walk again, basically, after that surgery. And so they really didn't know what to expect. And right about the age of 8, I expressed an interest to my parents that I really wanted to start dance. I had a friend at school who did it, and on dress-up days at school for who's your favorite character, who's whatever, she would come in these ornate costumes. And I was like, I want that. I want to be that. And so that was kind of how I got started with dance. And then really it honed into just really having a passion for ballet. I've always loved music. I've always loved movement. And in my mind, I could see both. If I heard a piece of music, I could see the movement that should match that piece of music. And so...
Okay, that's really a gift because I can barely double clap in church. So I just want to say that is definitely a gift. And you started in dance after...
I did.
That is amazing.
So my parents, I think, were a little hesitant, just not knowing what the repercussions could be or would be, but they knew I really wanted to try. And so I did progress. I ended up pursuing ballet for years. My mom and dad, every year when we would take professional ballet pictures, would actually send a picture to the surgeon that did my surgery. His name was Dr. Van Steenvoort at Children's Hospital in LA. And they would send him a picture and they would thank him for that every single year, just because they knew that was an unknown and whether that would happen. And then it was just amazing that I was able to do that.
That is such a gift. How neat is that for him to be able to see that, the fruit of his work, and not knowing exactly what was going to happen.
Yep.
But there was a little bit of stick-to-itiveness for you in that too, at that young of age, and for your parents to give you that. It had to be a little scary for them to let you get into ballet and not, like you said, not knowing exactly how that was going to head out. And yet you succeeded tremendously in it.
Right. I think that I had a little bit of a disadvantage because of the hip surgery. I remember, though, I've always been kind of see the glass half full kind of gal, which I'm so grateful for. And I think even back then, I saw it from the perspective that I got to do those things and that it was special. It was a gift. And even though I was a little bit disadvantaged, I just worked harder. I think where that passion developed from was just, like you said, the stick-to-itiveness.
Yes, right. I'm thinking of all the things you went through to say, like, I'm doing this and I'm going to be just as good as these other girls.
Yep.
And yet having gone through what you'd been through.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. So how did ballet go for you?
At first, it started off, it was always a passion. I loved it. I did it. I wanted to do it no matter what. I think when you start off as a younger child, you're getting the accolades, you're getting the experience of being on the stage and getting praised for that. And it's fun. It is rewarding. You want to go back because you know how much fun that you had and you just want to keep doing it. But right about middle school, kind of had people in life talk about like identity crisis. Had a little bit of an identity crisis. My family moved from one city about 25, 30 minutes to a different city. And I started junior high at a brand new school. I had to start ballet at a brand new ballet studio. So brand new teacher. And it was actually not called a studio. It was a conservatory. So she taught Russian ballet.
Okay, I was going to say that sounds
Yes.
like an intense ballet studio. Like we have switched from the fun, we're going to have fun with this. Sounds like a competitive place.
Exactly. And I don't know that I was quite prepared for that. But again, if the challenge was put out there, I was going to meet that challenge and exceed the challenge. But it all kind of created this thing where for most of my life, I had always felt like I was enough. I kind of knew my identity, knew who I was in God. And then all of a sudden, right at middle school age, it's pretty typical. I've watched all 5 of my kids go through this process of really honing in on who they are and who they want to be, and then kind of wrestling with who God says they are.
Oh, isn't that true? Boy,
Yes.
That is that awkward age of doing that.
Yep.
Yes, I can vouch
Yep.
for that as well.
So that is exactly what started to happen. And right about that time, I remember having conversations with myself about myself in my head. And a lot of it now, as I look back, was really related to the ballet studio and the striving for perfectionism, the looking in the mirror at myself every time that I was in that studio. Now, granted, when I was younger and looking in that mirror, I loved what I saw. And for the first time, a lot of my flaws were being pointed out. I had a very, very intense set of ballet instructors, and being told that you're not skinny enough, you're not strong enough, you don't have the turnout that you need. I'm just really kind of started setting that bar really, really high, but not in a positive way. It would have been, I think, something different had it been done in a positive way versus a negative way. And for me, that started that self-critical talk of I am not enough. And that really shifted my identity that I really had in Christ. Somehow it related back to my relationship with God. But then soon enough, I wasn't even in my own eyes enough in God's eyes. I've also watched my children struggle with that. It's a really hard place to be. For the first time in my life, I really heard words like, you're ugly, you're rejected, what you do is irrelevant, insecure, you're an outcast. Because, the time that it takes to be dedicated to something like that really doesn't allow you to have much of a social life either. I spent a lot of time Monday through Friday at the dance studio. And then on Saturdays and Sundays, we had all day rehearsals. So,
wow.
Yeah, that kind of led to that not being attached really with a friend group. I mean, I had friends, but most of my friends were at the dance studio.
And so you were living in that constant critique, that constant not enough, you need to be. It
Right.
sounds like that. I love what you said, that there was a time when you looked in the mirror and you loved what you saw.
Yes.
To my heart, that really connects. I remember being a little girl and loving myself and loving what I saw in the mirror and feeling like I was enough. And I don't know when exactly I lost that, but I love what you said, that then you begin to see yourself differently.
Yes.
You begin to see the flaws, the imperfections.
Yes.
And it sounds like, just based on the environment, right, of competitive dance, that maybe it was other people's expectations that you were trying to meet and live up to.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. There's a statement that I have heard recently where if we live by expectations, those are premeditated resentments.
Oh, that's good. If we live by expectations,
others' expectations of us, then we are setting ourselves up for premeditated resentments.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I do have to say, when I ended my dance career there, I did have to wrestle with a lot of those resentments because of just kind of being put in that place of not seeing myself as enough and walking away from it with that and having to work through that.
And how did you do that? I mean, that is such a hard age, right? Between 12 and on. Right. At what age did that shift? Did it not shift? What was the next step forward in that?
It did. I danced until I was about 17. I had worked really hard to get to the place as a conservatory. We always did the Nutcracker every single year at Christmas time. And I had really worked hard at going on to Point, being in Point shoes, and then also dancing with a partner. And that is just such a unique opportunity to get to learn how to do that, because if you go to the ballet and you see partners working together, I don't think people would really understand what hard work that is in order to work with a partner, because the female is really fully dependent on the male. at certain points, spinning her, lifting her, carrying her. There's definitely a technique to it.
It sounds like marriage, Kristin.
That's true. Yes, very true. And so I had gotten the role as Sugar Plum Fairy and just was thrilled. Worked really hard with my partner. Our dance instructors really pushed us to the limits. They even pushed us beyond what they knew would work or whether we could do it or not. And I think the difference in a ballet studio is you are practicing on wooden floors versus, let's say, a gymnast and they're on mats. And so if you fall or you're dropped, it's painful. And so the teacher was challenging us to do a particular lift, and it involved my partner basically had me above his head and he wanted to spin me in a 360. And then he was supposed to catch me and kind of dip me down. You know, in your mind, you can envision, you know, that it would be real smooth, but it was not.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He ended up spinning me, but he did not catch me. And so I hit the floor and I ended up with a really severe back injury. This was my senior year in high school, and I was looking forward to going to Milwaukee Ballet that summer with the intention of pursuing then a professional dance career. And this injury, I was incapacitated for about 9 months.
Wow.
So going through physical therapy. Luckily, I'd kept my grades up in school. And so I changed courses really quickly and decided I wanted to go to school to be a physical therapist, just because that was the person who was kind of bringing my back health back for me.
Now, after that injury, could you still dance after the 9 months of therapy?
I could, but the range of motion in my back was very limited. It was extremely painful. And so there was just no way for me to get that 9 months back. So that rocked me to my core when we were talking about not being enough and kind of having identity issues. That really set me back. I remember in high school telling other people that I was given a gift, and my gift was dance. And that was basically the gift that God had given me. In performing and doing all the things that I did, it was always to the glory of God. And having that ripped away was really difficult. I do have to say that then with all the lies in my head, as far as telling myself that I wasn't enough, I came to a point where God was not enough for me because of what had happened. And I kind of walked away for a couple of years. And that was a really hard time, very hard time. I ended up with an eating disorder because I wasn't active any longer like I had been before. And rather than, I think, taking my anger out on other people, I think it turned inward. It just became, and I hate to say this, but it's the truth, became a hatred for myself and toward myself. I'm just so grateful that I did come to a place where I got in a car accident because I was down to 88 pounds and was really, really sick. Got into a car accident, and I think that was my wake-up call. It was my wake-up call to realize that the way I was doing life wasn't working. I specifically remember the day thinking, like, you need to look up. You need to stop looking around at your circumstances. You need to stop looking inward at your feelings. You need to stop allowing those things to dictate who you are, what you're telling yourself, and you need to look up and seek God, and you need to kind of revisit who He says you are, which was so opposite of who I was telling myself that I was.
I can really relate to that. I can bet that our listeners do too. I think that's something we all have in common. You know, our circumstances might be different. Our experiences might be different. We might not have been born, you know, with a birth defect that caused us to be on our back, right? Yeah. And forced to look up. There's a beautiful lesson out of that in retrospect, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And then sort of coming through that and then becoming a dancer, which is amazing in itself, just that nugget.
Yeah.
And then going through what you went through, like that, coming to a place, it sounds like that accident was that huge turning point for you. You know, I may not have had those same experiences, and our listeners may not have the exact story.
Right.
But I don't think there's one of us that hasn't dealt with the not feeling like we're enough.
Right.
Or as you expressed at the conservatory, trying to live up to the expectations of others,
Yes.
having others say what you should be, how you should look, even if a person hasn't directly told us that,
right.
Boy, we get those messages on social media,
Yes.
I don't know, when I was growing up, it was magazines.
Right. Exactly.
And now it's right on our phone.
Yes.
We can compare all over the place, but that not being enough. And then isn't it interesting that you ended up back on your back, looking up?
I did. Yeah. I remember distinctively, like I said, that moment that it hit me, that I was looking up again and I was in that place of need. It was just such a beautiful part of my story that God met me exactly where I was at. I mean, he already knew. He knew what I needed. He placed other people in my life that were able to minister to me during that time and to help me turn that around. That's why I'm always talking about perspective. Again, just not looking around and not looking inward, but trying to seek what God's perspective is about it. How can I walk that out? And how can I share that with others?
That's beautiful. I love that God put other people in your life. I was thinking, how do you go from that moment? How do you go from having that God-sized hole in your heart and questioning your identity to then coming through that? Yep. So would you say it was the voices of other people that God brought into your life? How else did he meet you there?
Yes, it was definitely the voices of other people. I think it was people that crossed my path that I may not have even known, but walking away from that, whatever that interaction was, and recognizing that it was something of value, that it was something out of the ordinary, whether it was a story that they told me, whether it was just a word that they used in whatever they were telling me about that I picked up on. And I think that is something that I've continued to see throughout the rest of my life, is just the common threads that God puts in our life and kind of weaving those together.
That's so beautiful. Having those eyes open and looking for those. I think sometimes I miss them. I'm a little slow. I joke that God has to yell really loud or, something in order to get...
Or you get in a car accident. I mean, that's pretty...
Right? That right? He got your attention with that, even though he didn't cause that. Right? He used it to bring you closer to him.
And I think I love the fact that we've been talking about God is good and works things for good. And that is exactly, if you look at just the incident, again, circumstances, if I'm looking at just the circumstances of getting in a car accident,
there's nothing good about that.
No.
Right.
But then shifting that perspective to looking up and trying to see, what does God have planned in all of this? What is his purpose? Then that kind of brings it all together.
I love that. And I think so many of us can relate to that moment of sort of coming to a place where you realize you need something. Yes. You need someone. You need him.
Yes.
And then him meeting you there through other people. I think that's such a testimony.
Yeah, I think also, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the other thing I want to say is that he also met me through just community. I was involved in a church, a small group. He even met me in that and just providing in that way for me. Also in my parents, just that loving and that trusting relationship, and, having somebody that is in your court that wants the best for you. Mm-hmm. I think that's just an earthly example for us of what our Father in heaven wants for us.
That's beautiful. I love, there's so many encouraging parts about your story. I feel like we could do probably 3 parts on the different pieces, how God intersected the circumstances of your life and how he turned that identity. Because who I see sitting before me right now is a confident woman who knows who she is in Christ and at least knows how to find those answers. You know the truth, even if we don't always feel it.
Right.
How do you get from hearing those things that say we're not enough or say you can't do this, you're not qualified, having other people kind of speak into our life and meet us in those moments with God? Like, any other thoughts? Like, how do I get from there to this, this confidence that I see in you now?
Okay. So for the last 20 years, there's a lot of us that have heard about self-care, the promotion of self-care, taking care of ourselves, giving ourselves what we think that we need. I also did a perspective shift on that, and I kind of changed the verbiage behind that. And it was more about God care. I envision going to the hospital and getting an IV, when you're dehydrated, when you're sick. It's almost like that lifeline, like plugging into God and allowing God to kind of give me an IV of what his perspective is on things. And by that, I mean being in prayer, setting aside time on a daily basis to spend with God, to read his word, to read his scripture and memorize scripture. There are so many things that I remember from being a little kid, songs that we learned in school to learn our ABCs, songs that we learned to learn our verbs and what was it? Conjunction, junction.
Junction, what's your function?
Yes. So even having fun with it and just playing with that, but that God care that I'm turning to him and looking to him to be the source of what I need when I'm sick. And in order to change that identity, I don't know if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah. Just, getting up in the morning and getting my cup of coffee and remembering almost like he's a friend. He's waiting at the table for me. He's waiting to sit next to me on the couch. He desires for me to spend time with him and to look forward to that.
Oh, I love that perspective. That is a perspective shift, isn't it?
Yes.
Many of us grew up maybe not feeling that God was so personal and so right next to us, maybe feeling like he was distant.
Right.
Maybe feeling like he was ready to, tell us all that we were doing wrong. And what I hear in you in this is a relationship. I hear that your father is anticipating spending time with you.
Yes.
And you're replacing that with the truth of his word, the things that we hear, the things we wrestle with, right? Because it doesn't mean you haven't stopped wrestling.
Right. No.
Right?
No. And I was, as you were saying that, I'm thinking, I'm making it sound easy.
No, because it's not easy, but you know that because you've walked it.
Right. And so even when I came to that point where I had all of that negative talk in my head, one of the first things I remember doing is sitting down and just continuously turning the pages of my Bible and trying to identify positive words in the Bible that described God, turning those, knowing that he would want me to understand that that is the way that he looks at me, and to turn those around as daily affirmations for myself. So rather than saying I'm not enough, telling myself that I am enough because of what he's done for me and who he's created me to be.
Yeah, I love that. That brings us right back to being created in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kristin, I love hearing your story. And I'm looking forward to hearing more and letting our listeners just have a sneak peek into your walk with the Lord and all of the things that he's brought you through.
Thank you.
If somebody was listening right now, because I know they are, and they're saying, whoa, I can relate to so much of that. And I've felt like I wasn't enough, or I'm feeling like I'm not enough, and I need that perspective shift. What would you tell them?
I would tell them that if I were looking at them and I were speaking to them, I would want them to know that I see them and that they're recognized no matter where they're at. They could be sitting in a place of pain, a place of isolation, but I would want them to know that they're not alone. And I would also want them to understand that with God, there's a way to get them from that place to a place of hope and a place of community, just through that perspective shift, because then it becomes about them and it becomes about God and it becomes about their relationship. I would just want them to be encouraged in that, to find the hope in that.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing today. You really touched my heart with your story. So thank you. Well, guys, if Kristin's story has touched your heart the way that it's touched mine, you can connect with her. She is an amazing, real person sitting right here in front of me, and she'd love to connect with you. We have a private Facebook page that Kristin is super active on, one of our leaders. It's called Living the Reclaimed Life. So if you go into Facebook, search out the groups, and you can connect with Kristin. I know she would love to hear from you and encourage you in any way that she can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Denisha.
Oh, Kristin, thank you. I love you, girl. Thank you. Thanks for listening. And I pray that you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. We would love to stay connected with you on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of a growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoy this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is a huge help in helping us reach more people and helping them live the reclaimed life. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.